All right, everybody. I know that y'all are so ready to start this project and stop doing this practice stuff, but everything we've done, I promise, has been for a reason. So I want to show you what the actual project is. And I had some examples, but I want to show you like how everything is going to work. This is one of an example from last year. You're going to draw yourself. So the people who are not loving their pictures, really what you're needing is the black areas and white areas to be able to fill in all of the black areas with things about you using the images from the 30 pictures we sketched. So I'm going to flip through this and I'm going to talk about different things at different times. That's not one of them. Here is one. This is Lilius Probelowski. And this she filled in her black areas, the ones in her eyes and stuff, very very dark and no pictures, but the stuff around she put pictures. And here is her start where she drew out her picture, and this is how we're going to use that grid method that we just learned with the Iron Man to create this picture. So you're going to actually draw. Oh, stop doing that. All right. You are going to draw. If there's a black line, you're going to have to draw the outside, all the way around the outside of the whole black line area. So you wouldn't just draw a line right here. You would draw the outer of it and the inner of it, and then you're going to fill that in with black later. If there are marks on your face that you do not like, you do not have to keep them. I did my best. I spent hours and hours and hours editing these pictures, and I know they don't come out looking perfect, but I do want them to be able to be seen as you. That's the important part. All right, it was more of Lilius, and this was one that was in the examples. Here is one. You can see that she added the items around her, and where hers was very polka dotty, like right, it was very shady looking. She used stippling, which is use of dots, to kind of create that shading area in hers. This one, she had the white area behind her, but she wanted to fill it all up with objects. I think this was Addie or Abby, I can't remember, but it looks, you can tell that she used the grid because her face looks like her. Um, this is, I think it was Elena. But she filled up all of her space. She did an amazing job of adding all of the things about her. And yes, she has more than 30 things on this picture. So you can use things that you did not draw in your sketches, but those sketches are just there to help you when it comes time to put it all together into a picture. This is somebody that was doing their drawing. They had already erased their grid. The grid was drawn behind this, and you can see it right here, and it was on here. Do you see that they drew lightly enough that they were able to completely erase the whole grid? Different project. She even went as far as drawing around all the details, and even though this area right here did not look like an eye. It doesn't look like an eyeball. But when she's finished, and I'll show you hers finished in a minute, it's really pretty cool. And she actually used images in those black areas that create her eye. Her parents have it framed in her house. This one, again, to create the nose line, she wrote some sort of saying or quote. She used the stippling down here in her neck, which was neat, as shading. Here is Cole's. Cole's turned out amazing, and you can see how he's using the grid, and he's drawing exactly what was on the picture. The reason I put the grid on yours, so you don't have to print it off if you don't have a printer. That's why I have everybody, I print off the pictures. Y'all draw a grid. That's created double the amount of work for me this time, but at least you have it without having to print the pictures off, because I know everybody doesn't have access to a printer. Here was her in progress as she was working on it. You can see how she drew around all the shapes of the eye. This was her in progress. Very, very detailed. Lots of information in there. This is somebody's sketches, so you can see that this is the sketches that they took, and they're creating their picture with them. This was Lilius again. This person didn't necessarily use the grid. Don't know if you can notice. But the nose and the eyes and the mouth are not spaced properly. So you have to make sure you use the grid and you know how to use the grid and understand how to use the grid so your picture comes out looking like you. This was Olivia and Taylor. This was a very, very artsy kid. She loved to draw and she was very talented. So she didn't think she needed the grid. But turns out when she was done, she was like, you know what? I probably should have used that grid because her eyes were not in the proper place and her nose wasn't in the proper place. And she just thought she knew how to do it without the grid. But I promise you, it will be better if you use the grid. Here was Cole's. I love the fact that he left this like this is called an imaginary line because your eye there's a line here, you know that the side of his face is here, but your mind creates that line for you. So I really like the way he left that blank. His was really cool. Here was the one that I was showing you. She drew all those weird shapes and people looked at it and I was like, oh, that doesn't even look like an eyeball. But then she added these elements in here that created more interesting pieces around and on her face. And her parents have this framed in their house. They love this picture of her. There's another one of Madison, different Madison. Shay. Shay also used the words to create the lines of her face. This was hers finished. She added a lot of detail, used patterns to fill up spaces if she didn't have the spaces filled, or if she just colored them in black and left the lines white, which was a cool alternative. This is Jacob. It looks just like Jacob. Jacob used the grid. He did it exactly right. He did not add a lot of things because he said he didn't like 30 things and he had trouble coming up with 30 things about himself. But it was neat that he used the things in all these. I think that's the little apple symbol or something right there in his eye. Seen that one? This, I think it was Maddox, and he used the invisible line. He didn't fill all the space in. I wish he would have done one side so his neck didn't quite look like his head was floating, but he did use that technique. Here was Lilius's again. She used a lot of patterns. Seen it. That was her finished one. This one, they didn't use the grid as much. Like the hair ended up a little strange because they filled in the space where the neck is and didn't actually draw the neck in there. So that was a little different. People who've done tongue sticking out have not been very successful at it. This person did not use the grid. They thought they could draw the eyes where the eyes needed to go, and you can tell that they did not use the grid. There's a drawing. That was her original picture. Strange poses, like the angle is weird. Sometimes doesn't come out good in the end. This was where I got the idea for the project, and you can see how they incorporated all the things in the hair, which is neat. That was not one of my students. The rest have been my students. This one of my favorites. This was a girl named Yamilet, and the stuff that she used and the way that she incorporated all of the like this little guy right here is hanging on to a strand of her hair, and there's a swing that becomes a part of her hair, and I like the way that she did like this black unicorn, but where she wanted the lines to be, she left it white, so there's that white line in between. You're not going to get to use any whiteout on this, so we're going to make sure it's drawn completely perfect before we start sharpieing anything, because whiteout will ruin a picture. Not really drawn correctly with the grid, I don't think. Some of these were some of the first times that I taught this project, and I didn't have as many good examples. So there's more of a don't do this kind of thing. You can tell not drawn with the grid, strange line going down her nose there. That person didn't put anything in there. No things about himself for some reason. Don't do that. But I mean, some of these kids I taught 10 years ago, but I still, based on their picture, remember who they are and know who they are. And that's what you're trying to get out of this project. The ones that I showed you at the beginning are really the good to-dos. So hopefully seeing this pile of pictures will help you to understand what we're doing and why we're doing it and what your picture is going to look like. Oh, this is one of my favorites. I wanted to show you this one. So I just love her placement of objects in here. And she doesn't have an overly large amount, but the way that her hair was flowing down and she added this lighthouse and the way these characters kind of they're done so well, but that's not a lot of stuff, but it's still really good. It was one of my favorite ones. Oh, there's a good version of it, a better version. Make sure this is another example of make sure you use the grid, and also you got to trust what the grid says. So he thought he needed the shape of a whole nose here, but that is not the case. So don't make stuff up that is not there. If it's there, draw it. If it's not there, don't draw it. So trust the grid and don't try to create these things on your own. Ooh, don't do that. Um, Again, grid. Like you have to trust what the grid says. So if, all right, this one's an amazing one. This is kid. He was kind of wild and different. But you can see he had these shadows in this space of his face, and he drew around the outside of the shadows. And he didn't like the way his face looked when he first looked at the picture, but when he finished this, he loved it. He did add a little pops of color here and there into his picture, and that was all right because he just used one color for a little bit of emphasis. So if that's something you want to try, you can, but it's not definitely not required. But I liked his stippling, and even his stippling is like closer together in darker areas. This was a really, really good example. Upside down. All these are upside down. All right, so that's about it probably on understanding how the grid works and what exactly you need to do with the grid. I hope this helps. We will go back. Oh, I like Ty's because I like the way he created. This was the only maybe good thing he did in the whole year he was in there. But I like the way he made this duck thing into his hair, and I like the way that he created his eye with a football because his whole life was football. All right, so there are some good examples, and I hope this helped. And we will start working on this using your grid. If your grid was drawn really darkly, you want to be like Cole. You want to be completely able to erase all elements of that grid. Like you can barely see a line right here on his, maybe. But you want to be able to completely erase that grid. So if your grid was drawn dark, you might want to put another piece of paper on top of it and trace it really lightly. If your grid is not accurate, if your squares are not squares, you might need to work on that because you cannot draw with a grid if your grid is not correct. All right, I'll stop talking now. Y'all have a good day.